Arpit bhai, good
Up.
morning.
Good morning, Ji. Good morning.
So good morning, everyone. And acha, first I'll make ma'am the co-host. And Arpit ji, Kartiya, yes, and ma'am also. Ma'am, Arpit ji आपका हो गया था co-host?
अभी मैं ड्राइव कर रहा हूँ, पहुंच रहा हूँ रुक जी, ऑन वे मैं देख लूंगा अभी, है ना?
नहीं वो
पहुंच
नहीं
गया।
मतलब co-host कर दिया आपको हाँ.
ठीक
Yes,
है।
So
yes, yes.
yes, so yeah. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to yet another wonderful edition of SMS. So after a vibrant time of filing JSTAT return appeal, and after also collecting some tokens on the way, I think now we are a bit relaxed. But जैसे कि हम लोग फैकल्टी मेंबर्स जानते हैं कि रिलैक्स तो होना नहीं चाहिए, एक के बाद एक काम रहना चाहिए. हम लोग 9 के बारे में सोचेंगे, तो जैसे 9 के बारे में सोचेंगे तो वी हैव टू थिंक कि 9 क्यों प्रॉपर्ली करना चाहिए, सो दैट वी डोंट गेट नोटिसेस अंडर 74A. So today we are lucky and fortunate to have amongst us Deepika Ganeshan ma'am, who is our family member from the GST faculty group. So she's consented kindly कि even after filing GSTAT appeals till yesterday, she will take the onerous responsibility of sharing with us about the delicacies of 74A. So just to, I know that ma'am does not need an introduction, but I'd just like to briefly introduce ma'am. So CA Deepika Ganeshan ma'am is a Chennai-based chartered accountant specializing in finance and taxation. She's author of multiple books on GST, and she's a faculty for indirect taxation for CA students, okay, for CMA as well as CA students also. She's also a faculty of diploma course on GST. She's a faculty course for certificate for members. She's a guest faculty on finance and taxation in various colleges and institutions. She's also has to accredit, of being an accredited GST trainer. And she has presented many papers in Pune, in Hyderabad, in Ghaziabad. And she is also awarded an award of Arivu Thulir, which is in Queen's Mary College on Women's Day. So with this brief introduction, I would like to request ma'am to take on the baton of sharing with all of us the intricacies of Section 74A, which I'm sure will be very important for all of us to understand, because the dynamics have changed. Now, what is a fraud? What is a non-fraud? So all these issues need to be taken into consideration. So welcome, ma'am, and over to you. And before I start, I just like to think.
Sir, your voice is not audible.
Everybody's voice, your voice is not audible.
I think sir is traveling, so.
हाँ, that's
Is
it.
it? Yeah. Ma'am, you
Hello?
can share now.
Yeah. So is the screen visible?
Yeah, it's just going to be visible, ma'am. It'll take some time.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So thanks, Sarup sir, for the warm introduction. And thanks everyone for joining on a Saturday morning. So yes, let us proceed into the section 74A, which is applicable from financial year 24-25 onwards. So the topics for discussion are, what is the need for new section? We already have 73 and 74, but what is the need for section 74A? Then we'll discuss the in detail the provisions of 74A, and then comparison between the old section 73 and 74 and 74A, and various judgments under 73 and 74. Now, first of all, why there is a need for introduction of 74A? So earlier, what happened was there were multiple demand. So when the tax was shortly paid or not paid, the officer had to first decide whether it is a case of fraud or non-fraud. So only after deciding they can actually invoke the section. If it is fraud, 74. Not in case of fraud means 73. So to issue a notice itself, the deciding factor was whether it is a fraud or not. And before even determining the tax liability, what happens? The proper officer will have to determine the nature, whether they are in case of fraud or misrepresentation or suppression of facts. So unnecessarily there were procedural disputes. So instead of actually arguing or debating on the tax liability, both the parties were first debating whether this is suppression, whether this is willful misstatement, or whether it is a fraud. So the litigation actually shifted from determination to classification of the proceedings. So this is one of the reason why there was a need for Section 74A. Next is excessive invocation of Section 74. So what happened was the officer, in case they have, the time is lapsed. That is 33 months was the timeline for 73 to issue a notice. So what happens? They generally put it under 74. So that was a main concern because there was a higher time limit. 54 months we had, higher penalty was there. So greater recovery mechanism was there. So mechanically they were telling, yes, there is a fraud, there is a willful misstatement, suppression of facts. So unnecessarily we had to get into an appeal or argument. So there was no supporting evidence. So what happens? High courts repeatedly observed that because there is non-payment of tax, it does not amount to suppression or fraud. So difference in interpretation, classification disputes, valuation dispute, or any bona fide mistakes cannot automatically justify that there are allegations of fraud. So large volumes of litigation arose solely because of Section 74. And procedural complexity because officers had to maintain two procedural framework. Time limit for notice is different under both the section. Time limit for order is different for both the section. Penalty is different, and voluntary payment also different consequences. So what happened is this resulted in calculation error, drafting mistake, limitation disputes, and inconsistent adjudication. So therefore, it was administratively inefficient for the government. Now, earlier law, fraud determined which section will apply, whether 73 or 74. Now, new law, fraud will determine only the penalty. So no more the department had to actually confuse themselves or get into a question whether it is a fraud or not. They can first issue the notice for the tax and interest. So later on, when the penalty wants to be levied, then they can actually decide whether it is a case of fraud or non-fraud. So here the fraud is only for determination of penalty. So there is a significant shift, and the focus has now moved from classification to determination of tax liability. Now getting into the provisions of 74A. So read with rule 142 1A. So it says where it appears to the proper officer. So that itself requires significant discussion on where it appears to the proper officer, because where it appears to the proper officer cannot be a mechanical statement. He needs to have substantive evidence or material facts to prove that any tax has not been paid or shortly paid or erroneously refunded, or where the input tax credit has been wrongly availed or utilized. So then what happens? The department can serve as a notice in GST DRC 1 on the person, whoever is chargeable with the tax which has not been paid or shortly paid, or to whom the refund has been erroneously made, or the ITC has been wrongly availed and utilized. So that person will have to actually reply to the notice as to why this tax or interest should not be levied. Now, in case the tax not paid or shortly paid or erroneous refund or input tax credit wrongly availed or utilized is falling less than 1,000 rupees, then no notice shall be issued. What is the time limit? So this is the major change with regard to the previous sections. So earlier under 73, we had 33 months from the due date for filing the annual return for not in case of fraud. And in case of fraud under 74 means 54 months. Now there is no bifurcation. For both the cases, it is 42 months from the due date for furnishing the annual return. And in case of erroneous refund, it is 42 months from the date of erroneous refund. So the time limit is same. And one more thing which we noticed was in the earlier sections, it was referring from the order, then it came to notice. Because in the section it was mentioned as 73 means 3 years from the due date for filing the annual return for issuance of order. And 74 means 5 years. For notice, it is just 3 months before the order due date. And for 74 means it is 6 months before the order due date. Whereas here it flows from notice to order. In previous sections, it was flowing from order to notice. Here it is from notice to order. So therefore 42 months there is a time limit. And for order, it is 12 months from the date of notice. It is not due date of notice. So that we'll be seeing. Now, Form DRC 02, a statement has to be issued. So whatever notice is issued under DRC 1, it has to be accompanied by a statement which will contain the details of all the taxes which is not paid or shortly paid, or any erroneous refund or input tax credit which is wrongly availed or utilized, and on the person which is who is liable to pay this tax. So this statement shall be deemed to be a service of notice, and the grounds relied upon for such tax period other than those covered under this 74A1, that is the first subsection, are the same as mentioned in the earlier notice. So the ground should be same, because here they say for such periods other than those covered under 74A. So if it is relating to other periods, then the ground should be same. Now, what is a penalty? So penalty as such, I don't see any change in the penalty except for the days. So non-fraud cases, as it was earlier, like 10% of tax due or 10,000, whichever is higher. And earlier it was 30 days. Now it is 60 days. So in case the amount is paid within 60 days, then there is no penalty. So fraud cases, if you are paying before service of notice, then 15% of tax as penalty. And in case you're paying within 60 days of issue of notice, earlier it was 30 days, now 60 days, then 25% of tax as penalty. Within 60 days of communication of order, then 50% of tax as penalty. So the penalty amount, there is no change, but whereas the days for paying that, there is a change. Then in case there is any representation which is made by the assessee, that is the taxpayer, in Form DRC 06, the proper officer shall consider that, and then he shall determine the amount of tax, interest, penalty, and issue an order in DRC 7, which will contain the tax, interest, and penalty payable. Now, what is the time limit for issuance of order? So 12 months from the date of issuance of notice. So this is where again a major change. Why? Because earlier it said 3 years from the due date for filing annual return, and fraud means 5 years. So even if you have issued the notice much earlier, you still had the 3 years time limit. But whereas now your time limit is depending on the date of issuance. They are not mentioning as due date of issuance. They are mentioning as date of issuance of notice. So in case the department is issuing the notice within 30 months, then within the next 12 months, they have to issue an order. So this is one major change where you don't have that specific time limit, as they don't say as due date of issuance, 12 months from the due date of issuance. It is date of issuance of notice. So department will get less time if they issue the notice much earlier. Then, in case the officer is not able to issue the order within the specified period, then the commissioner or any officer who is authorized by the commissioner, who is senior in rank to the proper officer, and he cannot be below the rank of joint commissioner, then if having considered the reasons for delay in issuance of the order, then he can extend the period by a maximum of 6 months for issuing the order. So ideally it is 12 months from the issuance of notice, date of issuance of notice. So any reasons, then genuine reasons, then it can be extended for another period of 6 months. Now, this 74A subsection 8 read with 74A subsection 10, then rule 142.2. What it says, this is in cases other than fraud. In case you make the payment of tax plus interest before service of notice, then no penalty is payable in case the tax is paid within a period of 30 days from the due date for payment of such tax. So though in 74A subsection 8, they simply say when the tax plus interest is paid before the issuance of notice, then no notice shall be served and all this. But 74A10, what it says is penalty shall be applicable in case if it is not paid within the time limit of 30 days from the due date for payment. So in case you don't want any penalty, then pay it within 30 days from the due date for payment. So once he pays, then he shall inform the officer of such payment. So he has to file this form DRC 3 and acknowledgement shall be served in DRC 4. So in all these cases, no notice shall be served, provided tax paid does not fall short of the actual tax payable. So it has to be correct actual tax, that if you are paid, then notice shall be served. Suppose whatever you paid is less, then still there is a possibility of notice. Then payment of tax within 60 days. So in case you pay within 60 days of issuance of notice, then no penalty shall be payable. All proceedings in respect of the said notice shall be deemed to be concluded for cases other than fraud. But now here there is a contradiction, because in 74A10 they say there is a possibility for the department to issue a notice with penalty in case the taxpayer has not paid within 30 days from the due date for payment of tax. But whereas here they say payment of tax plus interest made within 60 days, then no penalty is payable. So there is a contradiction here. So we have to actually see. So let me produce this extract. I'll share it. So is the screen visible? And are you all able to see this extract of 74A?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So coming back. So where the proper officer is of the opinion that the amount paid under clause 1 of subsection 8. So clause 1 of subsection 8, what it says, the person chargeable with tax, where any tax has not been paid or short paid or erroneously refunded, or where the input tax credit has been wrongly availed or utilized for any reason other than the reason of fraud or any willful misstatement or suppression of facts to evade tax, may, before service of notice under subsection 1, pay the amount of tax along with interest payable under section 50 of such tax on the basis of his own ascertainment of such tax, or the tax as ascertained by the proper officer, and inform the officer in writing. And the proper officer, on receipt of such information, shall not serve any notice under subsection 1 or the statement under subsection 3 in respect of the tax so paid or any penalty payable under the subsections. Okay, now here what it says, pay the said tax along with interest payable under section 50 within 60 days of the issuance of show cause notice on, and on doing so no penalty shall be payable. So here it says, in case you pay within 60 days from the date of show cause issuance of show cause notice, no penalty shall be payable. But in 74A10 they are mentioning only subsection 8 clause 1, they are not mentioning clause 2, and they are also mentioning about clause 9 and subclause 1, that is in case of fraud. So shall proceed to issue the notice, the officer shall proceed to issue the notice as provided in subsection 1 in respect of such amount which falls short of the amount actually payable. So in case you don't pay within 30 days, so it is not 10, sorry. It It is 30 days from the due date. It is 11. Sorry, extremely sorry. So it is 74A. There is a mistake in this slide. It is 74A11. Okay. Yeah. So 74A11, notwithstanding anything contained in class 1 or 2 of subsection 8, penalty shall be payable in case the amount of self-assessed tax or amount collected as tax has not been paid within a period of 30 days. So for both the cases, it is applicable. So there is no contradiction at all. Extremely sorry. I missed out that point. So here again, penalty will be payable, shall be payable in case the taxpayer is not paying within 30 days from the due date of payment, tax payment. So officer can continue to issue a notice for penalty alone if he has not paid within 30 days. Possibility is there. So both the cases, whether you are paying within 60 days of the notice or before the notice, still there is a possibility for the officer to issue a notice only for the penalty portion, as section 74A11 states that. Cases involving fraud, payment of tax plus interest before the service of notice, then 15% of tax as penalty. Then no notice shall be served, provided whatever tax the taxpayer has paid does not fall short of the actual payable. Now, in case the payment of tax plus interest is made within 60 days of the issuance of notice, penalty will be equivalent to 25% of tax. And in case that tax plus interest is paid within 60 days of the communication of order, penalty is equivalent to 50% of tax. So in case all these are paid, then all the proceedings shall be deemed to be concluded. Now, rectification order DRC 08. So suppose where a rectification of the order is passed in accordance with the provisions of sections 161 and where the order has been uploaded on the system has been withdrawn, then summary of the rectification order or the withdrawal order shall be uploaded in form DRC 08. So this is the provision with regard to section 74A. Now let us get into the changes. What are the changes between the previous section 73 and 74 and the new section 74A? Now, earlier there is a shift from dual adjudication to unified demand mechanism, because earlier the first question for the officer was, is this a fraud case or a non-fraud case? Because only then he can determine the section under which he can issue a notice. If there is no fraud, willful misstatement or suppression, then 73. If there is a fraud or willful misstatement or suppression, 74. So to issue a notice itself, the officer had to determine whether it is a fraud case or not. Now in new position.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So now since you have gone through the entire section and briefed the whole section, now since you are coming to on 73, 74 versus 74A, and the
Yes,
first
sir.
thing which we have shared, that the first shift which is there is now the officer is no longer required to decide at the initial stage whether it is a
Yeah.
fraud case or a non-fraud case. Previously, he used to decide about applicability of section 73 or 74. Now it is only 74A. Now, if
Correct.
you go to section 74A1, ma'am, the clause, and now it's an open house session. Ma'am has shared the brief about the section and what the section says. Now it's an open house session because we can discuss on the nitty-gritties part as well. And ma'am will, along with that, ma'am will share with 73, 74 versus 74A. So, ma'am, if we go to 74A,
Yes.
so if we see the last line, it says why he should not pay the amount specified in the notice along with interest payable thereon under section 50 and a penalty leviable under the provision of this act or the rules made thereunder. So
Correct.
74A1 is still saying that penalty has to be quantified and mentioned. So now since 74, if one view is that Now, since 73, 74 is not there, 74A is only there. So there is no need for section to be identified, only 74A is to be there. But then if we go to 74A1, it says that the penalty also has to be mentioned in the notice. That means he is still required to identify, in my opinion, and this is a food for thought for everyone to discuss about it. That because SMS is known for contrary views, and so that we can
Correct,
work as a
correct, correct.
devil's advocate, and everyone has their own views. So still
Yeah. So
he is required to mention the penalty amount. And once he is required to mention the penalty amount, he would have to say whether it is 75 for A5 and 8, if I'm correct. Between A5 and A8, because A5 is for non-fraud cases and A8 is for fraud cases, if I'm correct. So still the determination is there. In my opinion, determination has to be there. And now, because of this is the first point, whether the determination is gone, in my opinion, it is still there. Secondly, if he is to now the section is not required to be changed, it is only the provision which is required to be changed, because it would only be between 74A now, it would not be a separate section. So whether second question which is there, can he invoke 74A8 initially in the notice and then determine it 74A5, that is a presence of fraud? And can he determine it that there is no presence of fraud, that is a separate section which was not invoked in the notice, but can it be directly brought in the section? And thirdly, whether now every notice would be having penalty, because then the officer would be free to have any section which he wants, because previously there was a bar that he cannot shift it from 74 to 73. If the view of the house is that he can shift, now whether all the notices would be coming in the, with penalty, and then the officer would be playing all sorts of games that he will drop it, and everyone knows what it is. So there are three main questions which I can share
got
it for
it, sir.
the house. First, whether now
Right.
the officer
So
is required not to
first, let
determine
us
the.
complete the first question.
Yes, ma'am.
So yeah, I think one by one we'll go.
Yes, ma'am.
So first question, even I gave it a thought, like because in 74A1 it says the last line says interest payable thereon under section 50 and a penalty leviable. But when you read the second line, like when it's he says whenever there is tax not paid or shortly paid or erroneous refund or input tax credit wrongly availed or utilized, it just mentions as he shall serve notice, and it may include penalty or not. There is a possibility because the serving the notice only is made mandatory, whereas here it just says as to why he should not pay the amount specified in the notice. So amount specified in the notice, there is no mandatory condition that penalty should also be specified. So my view is that
Hello. Yes, ma'am, my view is that whatever whatever appears to the officer, whether it is a fraud, possibility of fraud suppression, etc., or that is not, that allegation has to be made in the SCN itself. It cannot be brought on later. Officer cannot, at the determination stage, say whether it is there or not. So only thing is the confusion and the timelines for issuance of notice have obliterated. But whatever allegations, a person who is to respond to the notice, that notice must contain all the initial averments of the officer. Officer cannot rely that I'll determine later whether the fraud is there or not. Regarding Arpit sir's second question, penalty quantification, does it really talk about quantification of penalty? But yes, it does talk about mentioning the penalty in the notice itself. Quantification, sir, and ma'am, and all the other friends there. You already know we know, all of us know by our experience that especially the central officers, the CBIC officers, they never quantify it. They say penalty level
exactly.
so and so subsection. So quantification is a different issue, but the allegation whether it is a fraud or not has to be brought out in the notice itself. It cannot be, that opportunity has to be granted to the person who is being issued notice, and it cannot be added on later. It has serious consequences regarding other aspects later about the penalty or at the determination itself, or maybe some other consequential things also.
So you mean to say, like, when the notice is issued, then he should clearly mention 74A and which subsection, whether it is fraud or not in case of fraud.
So he should clearly mention whether there is a suppression or fraud, etc., or not. Whether he mentions it by
Okay.
invoking the subsection or otherwise. If he wishes to later on
Invoke that
go
higher
into
penalty or
invoke that, that should be included in part of the notice itself, so that the person has an adequate opportunity to respond to that. So we can't say he is freed from that responsibility at the stage of issuing notice.
Yes, sir. Arup sir,
And if he does not levy the penalty, then section 75 subsection something which says show cause notice cannot travel beyond the order cannot be travel beyond the show cause notice. So that will also impact 75.
75, yes, 75-7.
7.
My view is also the similar. It has to be mentioned in the show cause notice. As you know, show cause notice is the foundation of all the proceeding. He cannot do a post facto of the show cause notice. It will be have a different challenges. And as a principle of natural justice, if person has to be charged because of fraud or willful misstatement, he has to give an opportunity to clarify it is not fraud or willful misstatement. So in my view, it has to be mentioned in a show cause notice whether you are invoking fraud related provision or non-fraud related provision.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Rajiv ji.
Yes, Arpit bhai, I duly agree with Buller Saab. Not only the reason, the jurisdictional fact to invoke this section should be brought forward, but along with the evidence, whether fraud, whether suppression, whether misstatement, and why so. This is a must for initiating proceedings under 74 capital A. This is my humble view. And secondly, in some of the cases that we have been defending of non-mentioning of or non-quantifying of this penalty, apart from 75(7), there is provision that when the facts are such that a particular subsection applies to you, that is statutorily provided, whether 15% or 25% or so. So if it is not even not quantified, it is quantified by way of the statutory provisions in the act itself. This is the ground department takes in adjudication. You have not paid within so and so, so this penalty is attracted once it is established that 74 applies. So quantification of penalty may or may not be there, but without these ingredients as well as evidence to these ingredients, this notice cannot be issued. You must put the person to the notice at the notice stage of notice itself, that this is allegation.
So whether there is an allegation of fraud or not, that has to be mentioned.
Yeah, the person, otherwise you cannot start the list without putting that person to the notice. That was my humble.
Okay.
Also, sir, how will subsection 8 and subsection 9 operate unless we know whether a fraud has been alleged or not? Now, they provide different timelines for payment of tax along with interest, and of course 74A when we talk about fraud with penalty, percentage of penalty. So unless we know the fraud has been alleged, now even if I want to take advantage of these sections and pay my tax, I won't be able to do that completely.
You will be allowed, right? You will be allowed to pay the tax plus interest.
But ma'am, penalty I won't be able to pay. If I don't know I've been alleged fraud, then why will I pay penalty? So that subsection 9 gives me benefit of lower penalty. So unless I know, I won't be able to pay it.
So the first thing which yes sir.
Yeah, you can go ahead, sir. You can go ahead. You're telling something?
Anyone else was speaking?
Yeah, someone was speaking.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, let me.
So ma'am, this is the first aspect that most of us have an opinion that the allegation has to be made at the notice stage So
Notice
that he
stage
has
itself.
he has the benefit of opting or not opting for the 74A8 or A9, and the boundaries have to be laid down in the initial notice itself. The second important change, once you go through 74A1, then we will discuss. Yes, ma'am. You can go ahead.
Arpit
Yes, sir.
Arpit ji.
Anilesh?
there is one point, if you could allow me.
Yes, yes.
I have a question. Whether, for example, if in some cases there might be some cases where non-payment is alleged along with some mispresentation or so. In future, it is found that reason of mispresentation was there was no mispresentation or so, but non-payment was there.
Hmm.
In that case, the jurisdictional fact to invoke 74 capital A will subsist because it was there at the initial stage. Can we say that if you ask for payment along with this reason for non-payment being these special circumstances, and in future those special circumstances don't exist, even then the jurisdictional fact to collect payment will subsist, looking at 75(2) or so? We cannot say that if these ingredients are not proved by the department, then the jurisdictional facts to this invoke 74A did not exist.
Sir,
No,
Ranjit,
because
that was the precise question that I had put, and when ma'am reaches that point, we will discuss that. Once the allegation is that you had not paid the tax due to willful misstatement or suppression, and then you come to a conclusion that although the tax is due, but it is not due to willful misstatement or suppression or fraud, then can the officer himself shift to another provision wherein the separate penalty has been provided, although within 74A, which was previously under 73 and 74 separately?
Yes. That was
So that we
right.
will discuss once ma'am reaches to that point.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
so your question is relating to before the financial year of 24-25
No,
or
ma'am. Post
in
24-25. Post
post
24.
24-25. Okay, so
Post 24.
that means initially the show cause notice was issued as a fraud case,
Yes.
and later on the officer himself finds out it is not in case of fraud. So
Ah.
whether he himself can shift.
Yes, because there are two separate provisions for fraud and non-fraud. So once he has
Correct.
alleged fraud, that is specific provision under 74A5, 74A has been invoked. Now he is wanting to shift to another provision within 74A for levying penalty. Can he do so if it is not, if it is not part of the show cause notice?
Understood.
Ma'am, if we can go to 74A1 once again.
Yes.
One important thing which I have noticed, if we read through 74A1 initial lines, where it appears to the proper officer that any tax has not been paid or short paid or NSC refunded. So now, and if you go to 74, so there is a comma here in 74A after refunded. Now, if we go to 74, where it
There is
appears
no
to the proper officer that any tax has not been paid or short paid or NSC refunded, or now there is no comma after refunded in 74, but there's a comma after refunded in 74A. So when we go through the GST Council meeting agenda, 5th GST Council meeting, it appears was specifically inserted so that a mechanism can be given to identify and reach to a conclusion that the tax was not paid, short paid, ITC were wrongly availed, utilized, or tax was LDC refunded. Now, since comma is there, so where it appears is only attaching itself to the tax not being paid, short paid, NSC refunded. Now it appears as not attaching itself to input. Now the input is a standalone subject where ITC has been wrongly availed or utilized. Now again there is a comma. So the it appears part is now not attaching itself to the ITC availed and utilized. So in my opinion, and it is now again open to the ma'am or you also and all the members present. Now it appears is not attaching itself to input. So the process now is absent to arrive at the conclusion. Now once the process is absent, can the section be said to be validly invocable because it is in absentia of the process, which was the critical aspect of inserting it appears in 74 in the 5th GST Council meeting, because previously also it was where ITC has not been away. Now they made the change in 74, but 74A is missing. Now the question is open to the House for this important change, which I observed in 74A.
Good observation, sir.
Arpit,
Sir, Vimlani, let the ma'am start the
Yeah.
discussion and then everyone can join in.
Arpit sir,
So-
before we start the discussion on this, sorry ma'am to interrupt. Sorry ma'am
Yeah.
to interrupt. Sir, but the comma was there in section 73.
Yes.
In section 73, that
In
comma
3 it was
was there.
there.
In 74, it was not there. Now in 74A, it is there.
Yes.
So that may also be considered. Was it making any difference between 73 and 74 currently also, because those years before 24, 25, their adjudication has to happen. So it is not a distinguishing feature just for 74A. It was already existing. And now that since the sections have been combined, the 73 mechanism is being carried forward. So whether we need to discuss it, that also Arpit sir follows, whether we need to discuss it at this stage or maybe a little later when we proceed, up to you and up to me.
Yeah,
Ma'am, can
we'll do
express the
little,
opinion.
yeah, we'll do it little later, sir. Let us complete the other things and then we'll do it the later stage. Let us complete whatever I have. Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but I also have
Yes.
one question on that where it appears to a proper officer. So there are two school of thoughts on that aspect, whether section 61 or section 65 or any proceeding has to be there and then only section 73 or 74 or 74A notice can be issued, or the officer can directly issue section 74A. So there is a concept called show cause notice in vacuum. Whether can that be a directly invoked under section 74, or it has to be a some before proceeding and then it appears and then he can issue the notice. If you can show some throw light on that, it will be great.
So if we go to the section 74A on all, nowhere it is mentioned that a show cause notice can be or shall be issued only after the assessment. So it simply says that when there is no tax payment or short payment or erroneous refund or input tax credit wrongly availed or utilized, then the officer shall serve notice. So there is no precedence that there shall be an assessment order or any notice before this. So as per rule 142, there is one pre-show cause notice DRC 1A. So before issuing this notice, proper officer can issue one DRC 1A. So where there itself the assessee, the taxpayer can reply and there itself the demand can be dropped. There is one opportunity given. But nowhere, I don't see anywhere in this section where it mentions that there should be an assessment or audit before issuing a show cause notice. So other learned members can share their views. My view is there is no requirement. Yes, anyone else wanted to share? Hello? Shall I proceed then?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Next. So jurisprudential significance. So conceptual change. So fraud no longer determines the choice of statutory provision. So here in 74A, it determines only the quantum of penalty. So there is a change in the architecture of GST adjudication. Next is elimination of jurisdictional disputes. So under the old law, one of the most common grounds of challenge was department wrongly invoked section 74 because taxpayers were arguing that there is no suppression, no fraud, no willful misstatement. There is a difference of opinion. But now and after the taxpayer is successful, then the entire proceedings under 74 could fail. But now under 74A, this controversy largely is disappearing. Now proceedings are under one section. Therefore, the dispute now shifts to whether fraud has been established for imposing the enhanced penalty. So therefore, there is no dispute between which section now. It is only for the enhanced penalty. Now, common limitation period earlier. So biggest procedure earlier, what happens was this time limit for show cause notice under 73 and 74 was different. For order also, both sections it is different. But now we have a common limitation period. So where it is 42 months. So earlier professionals had to calculate the limitation differently depending upon the section, whether fraud has been alleged or not. But now it is uniform for tax period to which it applies, and so therefore it reduces disputes over which limitation applies and simplifies the adjudication. So now there is easier administration, fewer computational disputes, reduced procedural litigation. Now under this, so one adjudication mechanism now, one notice, one order, and different penalty depending upon the facts. So reduced litigation on suppression. So one of the largest sources of GST litigation was what amounts to suppression. So almost every demand was coming under 74. Then the taxpayer was arguing it is 73. So high courts repeatedly held that mere non-payment is not amounting to suppression. Mere classification dispute does not amount to suppression, or interpretational issue does not amount to suppression. Now this under 74A, this controversy is shifting. Suppression primarily affects penalty instead of the choice of section. So again, after seeing the discussion, so in the notice, show cause notice itself, the proper officer has to specify the intention, whether it is in case of fraud or suppression or willful misstatement, or not in case of fraud. So in that case, I think still this litigation will continue, but only changes, it is not between sections, it is going to be the penalty. So it is going to affect the penalty. So still whatever litigation was there earlier, whether it is in case of fraud or not in case of fraud, still it is going to continue. But the only thing, it is not going to be a choice of section, it is going to be the penalty. Now comparison table here. So this 73 and 74 is applicable up to financial year 23-24, and 74A is from 24-25 onwards. Basis of proceeding, 73 non-fraud and 74 is fraud. Here common. Separate section, yes, 74A, there is only one section for both. Jurisdiction depends on fraud, yes, both the cases, but now there is no separate jurisdiction whether it is fraud, non-fraud. Limitation, that period was different for both the cases. Now it is uniform for the tax period. And time limit for payment. So earlier it was only 30 days. Now higher time limit of 60 days is there. Penalty lower in case of 73, higher in case of 74. Now 74A again, it depends. Since it is one section, it depends upon whether there is a fraud or not. Voluntary payment in all three cases, it is available. Main litigation issue was 73 wrong invocation of this, and 74 was suppression. So suppression was the main issue, but here the main issue is whether there is an evidence, and the issue is with regard to penalty, whether enhanced penalty is applicable, and the limitation and the procedural fairness. So this
Ma'am,
is the
can we
comparison.
now, can you now please take up that query, which is everybody
Yes.
is interested in? So whether the officer can invoke suppression in the show cause notice and later on say that since there is no suppression, so subsection is being shifted. Because
So now if we go to section 75 subsection 7, it says the amount of tax, interest and penalty demanded in the order shall not be in excess of the amount specified in the notice, and no demand shall be confirmed on the grounds other than the grounds specified in the notice. So here it also mentions about penalty, and it says and penalty demanded in the order shall not be in excess of the amount specified in the notice. So having read along with this section 75 subsection 7, it is clear that in the show cause notice stage itself, the penalty also has to be established. And to establish that penalty, then the correct subsection has to be provided. And for that, the intention has to be very clear, whether it is in case of fraud or non-fraud. So therefore, in my opinion, while issuing a notice itself, the proper officer has to mention the intention. I'm open to hearing the views from other learned members here.
But ma'am, section 75(7) says the amount of tax, interest, and penalty demanded in the order shall not be in excess of the amount specified in the notice. So it should not be in excess. Suppose if 74A9 is invoked or 74A5 clause 2 is invoked, the full penalty is invoked, and then officer is changing it to the lighter penalty, a penalty under section 74A8, then he is going downwards in the penalty. So I think then 75(7) would not be coming in the way of changing the way for the officer. It's my view.
But
I mean,
yeah,
if we go to 75(2), 78(2)(a),
if where any appellate authority or appellate tribunal or court concludes that the penalty under clause 2 of subsection 5 of 75 is not sustainable for the reason that the charges of fraud or willful misstatement or suppression fact to evade tax has not been established against the person to whom the notice was issued, the penalty shall be payable by such person under clause 1 subsection 5 of 74A. So it is not in case of fraud. So
Yes, ma'am.
suppose if it is not established.
So my one view is there that previously the officer was not allowed to change from 74 to 73. A specific power was given by 75(2) to the appellate authority to send it back to redetermination, and then only he could have changed. Now what they have done is in 75(2)(a), the power has been given to the appellate authority to determine and shift the penalty from non-fraud to fraud. That means the power which has been given in 75(2)(a), it is only been given to the appellate authority. That power is still not with the officer. And once he has invoked a particular provision, he has to abide by it or drop it entirely. That power is only with the appellate authority, else 75(2)(a) would not have been there. And secondly, if non-fraud case has been made, then the appellate authority also does not have a power to increase the penalty to a fraud case. So if we go by a matrix, if we go by understanding of 75(2) and 2A, the power to shift from a fraud to a non-fraud is still not available to the officer. That power is still available only to the appellate authority, although now is not required to remand it back. Else they would have not required 75(2)(a). If that power was available to the officer himself, then there was no requirement for 75(2)(a). That power would have obviously been available to the appellate authority. But since a specific power is given, so appellate authority is only having the power to change from a fraud to non-fraud. Thirdly, he does not have the power to change from non-fraud to fraud. This is one opinion if we go by understanding of 75(2) and 75(2)(a).
May I
Sir,
add, sir?
Sir, please, sir.
Yeah. No, please, Rajiv ji, please go
नहीं
ahead.
please, sir, please, sir. Sir, please.
अरे सर आप ले लो सर 10-20 बचे हैं कोई दोनों में दे दे दोनों को मिलेगा
Rajiv ji, please go ahead. आप कम आते हैं, कम
Sir,
बोलते हैं.
Arpit ji, could you imagine and maybe imagine some case where if ingredients are removed, tax payment is also not your responsibility.
Ingredients.
Can you come back with the question, sir?
Yeah.
Come back, sir.
If suppression mispresentation is not proved, the facts will be such that no notice could be issued for even non-payment. For example, in 16(2)(c) cases, kind of thing. Could there be some case
The
that
supplier should have paid the tax.
if there is no suppression, it is okay, it is proved. But if you, my example is, notice was issued in 74. We proved that 74 is not applicable. Now you cannot come to 73. This is my point.
No, Rajiv, we are on 74A. So how this question fits in for 74A?
Yeah, whether this question will fit in 74A somewhere.
So question is that once a notice has been issued with penalty and
sir,
with reference to quantum of penalty.
74 thing. Even for the 74, we have the 75 subsection 2 which says the appellate authority or tribunal or the court, they have the power. If there is no reason of fraud, then they can shift to the lower penalty. They can determine as per the penalty. Yeah.
Yeah, that is okay. That 74 case can be shifted to 73. Now in 74A, this is 74(8)(9 that if penalty is already quantified. I am looking from that point of view. Penalty is quantified. That suppression is not proved. Then whether person can come out of that mess, that the 74A ingredient for suppression is not proved, so no case against them.
So, so your question is like whether the taxpayer can actually come out stating that this notice itself is invalid.
Yes. Yes.
So
Because there is no
one thought that Rajiv ji has given, that since there's a common section, so 74A operates separately for tax and separately for penalty.
Something like that, when you have to specify the penalty at the initial stage. So I wanted you to fix that you are fixed in this very provision. Now all my evidences have failed as an officer. Now what to do?
I think someone has to mute themselves.
So if I say that Rajiv sir's query in a way again boils down to 74A was invoked with fraud or suppression, etc. And now that fraud or suppression has not been proved in adjudication, now can the taxpayer say that now the order cannot be issued within that show cause notice? So it boils down to the same thing, whether the officer can scale it down to non-fraud, etc. So the primary question which we were discussing, it is the same question with a different sort of an example, different sort of this. To my understanding, if I'm right, that is the query. So again, coming back to this question, still not going to 75 to A, to capital A, but just first restricting it to within 74A. So I believe that what Rajiv ji is saying, or otherwise we were discussing, can it be scaled down by the officer to a lower amount of penalty? So one of the stronger grounds could be what Yogesh mentioned earlier in the discussion when we were talking about whether it has to be invoked in the SCM, that the opportunity of having a lower penalty or no penalty is different in subsection 8 and subsection 9. So taxpayer can very well and very justifiably go ahead and say, if in the initial notice itself it was mentioned or it was not mentioned that there is allegation of fraud, I would have used the option of 74(8) since I have been deprived 8(1). If I have been deprived of that option, since I had to pay 15% penalty also, I did not want to go ahead with that. So I have been deprived of that penalty. That can be one of the stronger grounds besides other grounds. That I would have my entire submissions or response to the show cause notice may have been different if suppression, fraud, etc. was not involved in SC. So can it go there? So that is the query limited to 74A and to the powers of adjudicating authority. To 75(2)A, if I may carry on. In addition to what Arpit sir said, one of the main reasons for saying this, that if it is not sustainable under 74A(5)(2), it will be sustainable by appellate authority or tribunal or courts against 74A(1). The most important reason, according to my understanding, is that many cases were lapsing. There was a CBIC circular also which said that if 74 failed at the appellate stage and 73 has to be invoked, the SCN should have been issued within that period itself, otherwise no proceedings. That case is lapsing. So it is to prevent such lapsing that 2A has been framed in this manner. And the timelines also are since now similar. But we need to, even if that timeline is affecting in any way, to prevent that lapsing. So it is 2A has been slightly modified for 74A, that within the 2A itself, it is said that it will be a case of lower penalty, no other adjudication, etc. That is for appellate authorities, etc. But whether the adjudicating authority can change it, I'll have my reservations.
Arpit ji, can I add?
Yes, yes.
PG, if we look at 75(7),
Hmm.
it says the amount of tax, interest, and penalty demanded in the order shall not be in excess of the amount specified in the notice. Well, one thing is it will not exceed, but it can be lesser.
Hmm.
Then, and no demand shall be confirmed on the grounds other than grounds specified in the notice. Now, my query is whether invocation of the charge of fraud, etc., whether that is a ground under section 74A or that is only for the purposes of quantification of the penalty. Because if we say that this is a ground for raising this demand, then the officer gets bound. Then he cannot change his grounds because of the operation of section 75(7). This is one point. Then if I say no, this is not a ground, this is a mere quantification under section 74A(5), then definitely he can move on. And even if I say that it is not, it is ground and not mere quantification, still whether because of the operation of General Clauses Act, an officer who is issuing an order, he can also rescind his order on any of those issues. So if we interpret in the manner that the officer whosoever officer is issuing this as a on the charges of fraud, he cannot retract from those charges, then the entire process of show cause notice will be left meaningless. So my humble opinion is that this ground part, now this ground can be read differently from the quantification.
In my
So-
opinion, I
Yes, sir,
don't
it
know.
has to be read differently. It has different connotations. Yes, sir.
Number one point. Number two, my another query was regarding the quantification of penalty under section 74A. If we look at 74A, it says the last part, show cause as to why he should not pay the amount specified in the notice along with interest payable thereon under section 50 and a penalty leviable under the provisions of this act. Now, when we talk of the penalty leviable under the provisions of this act, by this I may mean that the penalty under this section as well as any other section.
Any other
Now,
section.
when I move to 74A(5), it says the penalty in case where any tax has not been paid or short paid or erroneously refunded, or where input tax credit has been wrongly availed or utilized, either for the reason of fraud or non-fraud, the tax shall be equivalent to the tax due from such person. Now you see, if we compare the 74A(1) with 74A(5), when it talks about the notice part, it refers to the entire amount. Now this amount includes tax plus ITC wrongly availed, utilized plus erroneous refund. So they are collectively referred to as amount. But when it is quantifying the penalty, it is only referring to the amount of tax due. So whether
tax
does
due
it mean
itself, tax due itself means it is either non-payment, short payment, or ITC, which is wrongly availed. That is also tax due.
that is where my query lies. ठीक है ना?
विनोद सर, विनोद सर, क्योंकि अभी 10 बज गया, तो अगर 1 मिनट में हम लोग कंक्लूड करेंगे, तो आप एक बार कंक्लूड कर देंगे, तो फिर उसके बाद बोलिए सर।
मेरा सर सिर्फ में है कि ये जो क्या कहते हैं, जो वर्डिंग में डिफरेंट है ना, वहां पे एक जगह अमाउंट वर्ड यूज कर रहे हैं, एक जगह टैक्स ड्यू यूज कर रहे हैं, तो इट कैन बी रेड डिफरेंटली, क्योंकि एरोनियस रिफंडिंग के साथ और जो आईटीसी रॉन्गली अवेल्ड और यूटिलाइज्ड है, दे हैव टू बी रेड डिफरेंटली, क्योंकि मतलब वी look at the meaning of tax with reference to Supreme Court decision in case of Pratibha processor, even then this ITC and erroneous refunding will not get covered. That is what I am concluding.
Thank you, sir. And Deepika ma'am, thank you very much for the deliberation, and I think for inciting the thoughts. Actually, that is very important. Incite us. And जैसे विनम्र सर ने अभी जो issue very important, because where it's mentioned the amount was his tax. So maybe this is the food for thought that we are taking from today's SMS and for the coming week
Exactly.
to discuss in the group and also deliberate on it. And my deep gratitude to you, ma'am, for your time.
Thank you so much, sir. And I actually learned a lot from the learned members here with a lot of discussions happening. And I have certain judgments as well, but yeah, it's already 10. So
Maybe
maybe
Arupji is lost connection. So I would give the concluding remarks. So everyone is left with a Dil Mange More for 74A. Because there are
Yes.
many points which are left for discussion, and this is the beauty of SMS that we dwell on the final points and come to discussion which we keep it open, just like Ekta Kapoor serial, that what will happen next at the conclusion of the episode.
I think after GSTAT filing, now the forum has given us the thing to actually do a research on this weekend.
Yes.
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 And
So
ultimately,
that's
Abhijit, I think we would have to keep a session for 74A sometime later, because we already have
yes.
3 speakers finalized for the coming up 3 Saturdays. So, ma'am, we will
Right.
take opportunity again to call you on 74A for the unfinished
Yes,
agenda
sir.
on your part for sharing the judgments, and unfinished agenda on our part to discuss the final points and have your thoughts on and members' thoughts on those topics. So, thank you everyone for sparing out the
Thank
time, and
you.
let's meet next week for section 70. I guess, yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Arudha. Thank you, ma'am. Deepika, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Rajesh sir. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend ahead.
you.
Thank you.